Following is a post-mortem commentary about the first episode of Naturisers, a webcomic I released last year. This means I'll be going over a lot of spoilers about its story, so I highly encourage you to read the comic before watching this video. I also encourage you to post feedback on it, as it really helps in improving my craft. I also apologize if I sound unclear or awkward, as this will be my first time speaking English for this long. With that said, let's start the video. Naturisers is a digital webcomic inspired by superhero tokusatsu shows. It tells the stories of several young people from all walks of life who are, each in different ways, involuntarily given powers and put in a position of fighting against a reawakened extra-dimensional empire. Due to the shared problem of not being able to completely de-transform, they all end up living in the same house, working in a nearby flower shop, and try their best to not garner too much attention from townspeople. Naturisers as a whole isn't that old of a concept, but its history reaches a bit further than you might think. This is the very first doodle of Lotus Lambda, made after I saw a uniquely patterned dress in a shop. I thought it looked like a visor on a Super Sentai suit, and so I whipped up a quick sketch of a character to go along with it. At the time I was tinkering away at my old Pincer Legend webcomic, not too long for this world, so the concept was far from having my undivided attention. What I did do is flesh the concept out a bit. I added 3 more similarly themed characters to the roster, and, since I wasn't treating it too seriously at the time, added a silly backstory about all of them sans Lotus being dead or something and should be put in a different series for no discernible reason. Midway through 2022, after finishing up the last big Pincer Legend thing, in the form of Mary's Brawl, and passing my high school certificate exam, I added the remaining 2 characters to the team, refined the designs a bit, kept adding bits and pieces of trivia about them and their world, and all of that was kept exclusively in the extensive Discord conversations with my good friend Aniridya, how do I pronounce that? Who helped out significantly in the comic's development. A lot of said trivia is sadly lost to time, and I can't be bothered to scroll through the millions of replies to uncover it. A lot of it might be outdated anyway. Come 2023, I wanted to stop refining concepts that would go nowhere and finally work on putting my creation out there, in a bigger way than almost everything else before it. An ongoing webcomic, a medium I had quite an extensive experience in. Due to losses of motivation and other college-related obligations, I couldn't start the comic for quite a while, but eventually in October, I could finally get to work. In the months leading up to November, I was brainstorming ways on how I could develop my comic in a more efficient and thoughtful way. Pincer Legend and especially Sky High Force were, save for a very vague idea for the entire story, written on a page-by-page basis. One page was done, and then I would think about what would happen on the next, and I really wanted to avoid those kind of pitfalls this time around. Through that brainstorm came the idea of starting out with 3 backstory chapters, each telling a story of how Naturiser came into contact with the Divine Seed, and how their lives changed either thanks to or before said contact. That would give me much more time to properly think about and flesh out their team dynamic once they all gathered. That decision proved to be a real lifesaver. As it turns out, I had another problem on my hands. I was using designs that were an absolute no-go if I wanted something I could truly call my own, that I could have complete and utter creative control over. Up until then, these characters, or their suits at least, were unashamed rip-offs of the Sentai hero design aesthetic. Black visors, black undersuits plus a collar, extremely unified theming across the team. Naturisers' first iteration as a Super Sentai fan season just had to go. Can't risk a copyright claim in the very unlikely case it ever gets popular and or monetized. What became an issue is that making a suit design more original and able to stand out on its own became immensely difficult. I'm a pretty lousy visual designer, so any attempts to stand out were little more than variations on a Sentai suit aesthetic again. Good thing I went with the backstory chapters first, eh? That decision gave me just enough time to properly prepare the suit designs, although a lot of it was very last minute. Kaliagama's current design, most of it was done by Aniridya, was finalized literally right before the page it first appeared on. Worth mentioning is also the reason why Kalia was the heroine of episode 1 instead of, the team leader, Lotus Lambda. It's simple. I arranged the order according to how much stuff I'd done on each character so far. Kalia and her story was simply the most fleshed out at the time of starting work on the webcomic. Rose Alpha was up second, and at the time of me writing the script, this episode is in active development. Lotus will have to wait until at least very late 2025 for her turn. Let's start this section off with hard statistics. I started work on October 3rd, 2023 and finished it on November 22nd, 2024, 1 year, 1 month, and 19 days in total. You might think that's a lot for a single chapter of this quality, and you'd be right, as I definitely could have been done with it 3 months earlier if not for things that I can only blame myself for. Real-life obligations outside of my control were only half of the things that slowed down development. The other half was my own lack of motivation, laziness, and really unfortunate timing with a game I really got hooked on. After all, why do the tiring and unsatisfying task of churning out pages after pages when instead I could rack up hundreds and hundreds of hours in a game about a dying bald child crying out monsters in a basement? Development started slowing down in January-February 2024 when college exams were in full swing, and by March it halted almost entirely due to the internship I had at the time eating all of my motivation. Midway through June, when said internship ended, I finally finished page 24. 24. Wow, that's not a whole lot, is it? By page 25, end of July, I started having major doubts with the whole project. Over half a year has passed, and according to the story plan I had in mind, I had barely done a quarter of it. I realized what was approaching. A third year of college on top of a future thesis paper I need to write. Finding time and motivation for both of those obligations and comic work would be very unlikely and would negatively impact both. So I decided that if I wanted to get anything out, I would need to massively speed up work, motivation be damned. I had worries. Lack of motivation was a major reason for a lot of my former project's eventual cancellations. My return from vacations at the beginning of August marked the start of a period of absolute mind-numbing crunch that lasted all the way until the end of development. Where before I could go for weeks without drawing, now I was producing pages every other day. I really wanted to take bigger breaks along the way, but I knew that if I stopped for more than a few days even once, I would get lazy. And that would no doubt spell doom for the project, and by this point, I was getting really burnt out on. My estimations gave me time until the end of November before college stuff needed to be prioritized, so I also had a tight deadline looming over me too. I was counting pages down per month, stressing over how ungodly long it takes me to get each page done, thinking about which panels I could cut and replace with dialogue to speed things along, in which places could I allow myself to extra shading at the cost of more time spent on a page. I was spending much more time obsessing over such details instead of simply having fun drawing. If I had infinite time on my hands and if drawing Naturisers was somehow my full-time job with zero deadlines, this comic would look a lot better than it does now, but I would have much less of it done in a reasonable amount of time. This comic has the sad misfortune of having an author that keeps bouncing between two extremes. Either barely bothering to work on a thing, or working on it with such intensity that the thing's quality starts decreasing. For the life of me, I just couldn't land on that sweet spot in between. As stated before, if I just worked on it months prior, when I had the time, I would have saved myself months of stress and most likely released it earlier than I eventually did. Once again, I have to state how much of a help Anigate was throughout. Just for listening to me whine on Discord about how miserable Comic Crunch is, she deserves several hundred medals and a couple $1 billion. She also ended up offering a lot of visual and story suggestions that noticeably improved the quality of some pages, in addition to coloring pages 57 and 70 as a way to slightly speed development up. As I stated on my thank you page at the end of episode 1, she was very supportive and the comic would be much worse without her many inputs. Go check her stuff out, she makes amazing art and could really use some money right now. October and November 2024 were when my third year of college started, and so those 2 months were pretty much the final push towards completion. A few more instances of last-minute important additions popped up, everything from the finalized episode name to the overall comic description to even the poster. Everything was done as late as possible as I, for some reason, feared that making those things earlier would delay page banking too much. After finishing page 90, I went through the entire comic to give it some additional polishing, fix any mistakes in either visuals or dialogue, redraw particularly bad-looking panels, set a proper release date, and finally rest from the almost non-stop months-long crunch period. That period also made me think on a crucial detail I neglected taking care of so far. Who exactly is this for, and who'll even bother to see it? Outside of my middle school years of being on weird DeviantArt groups, I have kept mostly to myself on the internet. Thanks to that, my work has never really garnered any kind of following, and while that wasn't a huge problem before, recently I started craving more recognition. What I've had for a while, which has been the driving force in the making of this ongoing comic as well as my old 2022 storyboard Marius Brawl, is that because of my art's subpar quality not being able to sell my work on its own, I should make it up in sheer quantity, which would no doubt show just how much time and effort went into making something. A whole 7 minutes of a storyboard done in 2 months, a whopping 90 pages of a comic done in a little over a year, both by only one person with zero professional experience. Surely that's impressive. Surely that's going to put some ice on the things I make, right? On the 26th of November 2024, a result of months upon months of my work, my biggest work and anything to date, dare I say my magnum opus, and dare I say, at the risk of sounding really dumb, a project that I want to stay working on throughout all my life and finish it completely before I die, was released to the public. That marks the end of a boring recollection of a development timeline. Let's get to the slightly more interesting stuff, shall we? This is the first version of episode 1's cover art. In retrospect, it's a bit on a bland side, with all the floating heads looking off to the side and little else going on. I do however like the way I did Sky here. It's a shame I couldn't have found a way to include it in the final version. Somewhere between pages 32 and 35, I wanted to include a little flashback sequence about a younger Yume seeing one of those grey aliens being relegated to slave work around her mom's mansion. Said mom would also be there and would berate and potentially even hit the alien for not working well enough. The sequence was cut as at the time I thought it couldn't be seamlessly integrated without causing pacing issues. I still want to include it in there someday, so it's not completely scrapped. The final fight scene between Kalia and the two red guards was meant to start with a 2-on-1 fist fight that would end with the guards realizing that they should instead fight her at a distance to have any chances. The sequence was scrapped, as at the time I was already deep into the crunch period and prolonging the fight for that much would delay the release for at least another month, and that's not something I could have afforded. Episode 1 was quite obviously a big learning experience for me as a creator. I have been drawing comics in one way or another for as long as I can remember, but this specific project made me realize just how much I still have to learn. For one, keeping a schedule that accounts for anything else happening in my life and sets reasonable goals and milestones to achieve. Sky High Force and Pencil Legend did not have such a schedule. I made and released pages whenever I felt like it, for an audience consisting of 2 people and an occasional bot. I had high hopes for both of those projects at the time of making them, but I didn't make the effort to care about development and presentation. Naturisers was of course different in that regard, and I feel it was better for it. Sure, there wasn't anything stopping me from not worrying about it so much and just drawing whenever I had the motivation to. It is possible that I would eventually publish it anyway and there's no actual audience that would complain about me not delivering enough time. But I'm glad that I stayed mostly consistent in terms of putting in the work. It made me a better artist overall. I've also been made aware about a lot of strictly visual things that I need to improve on. After release, I have received feedback that some of the pages were visually distracting and hard to follow due to the sheer amount of dialogue some of them had. It's a very valid complaint. I myself think that some of them are not easy on the eyes, but this was sadly done for a reason, and it was once again due to, say it with me, time constraints. Why didn't you say it with me? There was an obvious solution to having less dialogue per page. Just make more panels accommodating that. But if I went with that option, episode 1 wouldn't come out for another year, due to the sheer amount of new panels and poses and settings to do. It would make for an objectively better product, but I very likely would have given up when faced with the development process this ungodly long. Skill issue, I guess? On a more positive note, during development I've spent a lot experimenting with subtle visual effects, improving my knowledge of anatomy, lighting, environment design, and most prominently of all, improving my panel layouts. After years upon years of depending on rectangles, squares, more rectangles, and sometimes rectangles with a bit of a slant at the top, I have finally started putting effort into how they could be presented and what their order of shape could convey. Don't get me wrong, there are still rectangles, but this time you can occasionally get a break from those with a neat little layout or two. I mean, I think it's an improvement. At the time of recording, which is January 2025, 3 months have passed since episode 1's release, and I have entered proper development of episode 2. I am testing on a different release schedule this time. Instead of putting on everything all at once, something down to wanting to wow people and have a good base to work off of, this time I'm aiming for higher frequency of posting. This is done through dividing the episode into 20 or so page batches, uploaded as soon as they're polished up and ready for release. This way I could avoid having year-long droughts with little to show for. Batch 1 will likely be ready somewhere during late February. As for their second, it's a bit hard to say for now. Probably still before my thesis defense this summer, I hope. I have made no secret that I'm insanely invested in what I made. The characters I've gotten attached to and the world that I'm eager to write stories about. For a good few years now, my life's goal was to create something lots of people would love and enjoy. Maybe, logically speaking, it's just me wanting validation and recognition, and I'm deluding myself that it's anything more than that. Maybe, I'm not denying it. maybe that's the case. Regardless of what it is, that goal still hasn't been achieved. I haven't marketed it well enough, and I haven't spoken to enough people to build any kind of following, and I think that's the precise reason why it sits at only 2,000 total views this day. I can only blame myself, but at the same time, I'm not giving up. After all, this project wasn't a one-off. I'm just starting out, really. Even after a year straight of stress and strain with at best diminishing returns, my drive to push myself and one day give this comic a big following hasn't weakened one bit. For the time being, I will continue. I will push myself even further than that. See you in episode 2. Thanks for watching this little one-off post-mortem commentary thingy I did. I had a lot I wanted to talk about and I think I've got most of it out. If I remember something after that, I'll just write about it in the comments. A link to the comic itself will be in the description and in the pinned comment. I once again encourage you to go read it. If you don't care about it, stumble upon this video by chance and for some reason you watched until the end, I have just wasted precious minutes of your life you're never getting back.